Welcome, everyone, to Rutgers at the voice of college football. Thanks for being here, and I wish a happy holidays to everyone. We've got the link to the show in the chat if you'd like to call in. And if you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button. So, we've got three topics tonight. First topic, preview of the Rate Bowl, Kansas State versus Rutgers in Phoenix the day after Christmas at 5:30 p.m. in Phoenix. Second topic, we're going to look at the first round of the college football playoffs, the college football playoff system generally, and make some predictions about those four games. Third segment's going to be on the transfer portal. Going to have some thoughts on the transfer portal, given the recent developments at several schools throughout the country. So let's start. The Rate Bowl. Now, I'm not sure who called it the Rate Bowl, but they must lack creativity because that's probably one of the worst names for a bowl except for the Pop-Tarts Bowl. But regardless, Rutgers takes on the Kansas State Jayhawks December 26th, 5:30 p.m. in Phoenix, Arizona. Rutgers comes in 7-5 and 4-5 in the Big Ten. Started off with a 44-7 win over Howard, 49-17 over Akron, 26-23 over Virginia Tech, 21-18 over the Washington Huskies at home in Piscataway. Then they had a 4-game losing streak, 14-7. They lost in Lincoln, Nebraska. At home, they lost 42-7 to Wisconsin. And again in Piscataway, 35-32, lost to the UCLA Bruins, and then went out to Los Angeles and lost 42-20 against the USC Trojans. Then Rutgers came back with two wins, 26-19 against Minnesota, 31-17 against Maryland, before suffering a heartbreaking loss against Illinois, 38-31, before ending the season 41-14 over Michigan State. Rutgers comes in ranked number 73 in total offense, number 80 in total defense, allowing 6 yards per play and 381 yards per game. Let's look at the individual statistics for Rutgers, starting with quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis. Kaliakmanis, the Minnesota transfer, 199 out of 363 attempts for 2,459 yards, 54.8 completion percentage, 17 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Running backs, led by star Don Bosco prep graduate Kyle Monangai, 256 carries for 1,279 yards, 5 yards per carry average, 13 touchdowns. Another Don Bosco prep graduate, Antoine Raymond, 82 carries, 344 yards for 4.2 yards per carry average. Then we have Samuel Brown, 40 carries, 201 yards for 5 yards per carry average and 3 touchdowns. The receiving core for Rutgers, Dymere Miller, 57 receptions, 731 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ian Strong, 38 receptions for 571 yards and 5 touchdowns. And KJ Duff, 24 receptions for 367 yards and a touchdown. What about that defense? Daryl Jabome, 102 tackles for the Scarlet Knights. Shaquan Loyal, 68 tackles, 2 interceptions. Flip Dixon, defensive back, 56 tackles, 1 interception. And Desmond Igmanosin, 51 tackles. So, those are the statistics. What did Greg Schiano have to say this week about the Rate Bowl and about his team? Well, he started off by saying Kansas State's a really good team, very formidable, and that they should have, in fact, won most of the games that they lost. Focused on Kansas State, Avery Johnson, special quarterback, and emphasized that Kansas State has serious speed as a team, with one of their wideouts running a 4.3 40-yard dash. Very well coached, and he acknowledged this is going to be quite a challenge for the Scarlet Knights, but definitely a growth opportunity. Now, let's be clear about something. Rutgers has had a bit of a challenge because their defensive coordinator, Joe Harrismiak, resigned to become the head coach at the University of Massachusetts. So as Schiano said, there's going to be some late nights this week trying to compensate for that departure. And he also explained that there's 2 defensive tackles and 1 running back they signed from the portal. But ultimately said this is going to be a formidable challenge. they're going to need to play well to win, especially because Rutgers has suffered a great deal of injuries this year that have really decimated that defense. But they've persevered through. They come in at 7-5, and now they face a Kansas State team that's had a pretty good year and has some great skilled players. So Kansas State comes in 8-4, 5-4 in the Big 12. Began with a 41-6 victory over UT Martin, 34-7 over a pretty good Tulane team, 31-7 over the Arizona Wildcats, but then suffered a big loss, 38-9 to BYU. Then defeated Oklahoma State 42-20, defeated Colorado 31-28. Then a 45-18 victory over West Virginia, a 29-27 victory over Kansas, but then an upset. They lost 24-19 against Houston, lost by 10, 24-14 against Arizona State, then came back and defeated Cincinnati 41-15, and ended the season with a 29-21 loss against Iowa State. So you see the losses for, Kansas State, all very close against some talented teams. What about the individual teams? And before we get to the individual team statistics, Kansas State, number 37 in the country in total defense, allowing 5.2 yards per carry and 338 yards per game, and number 45 in total offense. What about the individual team statistics for Kansas State? Well, QB Avery Johnson is a real talent. 202 pass completions out of 342 attempts for a 59% completion percentage, 2,517 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. DJ Giddens, the star running back for the Jayhawks, 205 carries, 1,343 yards for a 6.6 yards per carry average with 7 touchdowns. Dylan Edwards, 56 carries, 350 yards with a 5.4 yards per carry average and 3 touchdowns. And Avery Johnson, a dual threat quarterback, 102 carries, 548 yards, 6.3 yards per carry average and 6 touchdowns. How about those receivers for Kansas State? Well, we start with Jace Brown, 42 receptions, 763 yards and 5 touchdowns. Keegan Johnson, 29 receptions for 359 yards and a touchdown. And Garrett Oakley, 20 receptions, 220 yards and 4 touchdowns. How about the defense? Defense led by Austin Romaine, 89 tackles and 2 sacks. VJ Payne, 61 tackles, 2 interceptions. Marquez Siegel, 55 tackles and 3 interceptions. So, what did Kansas State's head coach have to say at his conference? Chris Kleiman, what did he have to say today? He said, well, he's got tremendous respect for Coach Schiano and for what he's done at Rutgers, and emphasized how this was an important game for the program, particularly in terms of development purposes. And he said what's going to win this game is going to be physicality, toughness, and discipline, and said that they have to get the run game going to be able to be successful against Rutgers. And ended by saying that the keys to the game are explosive plays, scoring in the red zone and turnovers. Well, mostly that's important in every game. Kansas State comes in with a 3-1 record in prior bowl games, favored by 6.5 at this point. So what are the keys for the Scarlet Knights to come out with a victory here? Well, Kansas State's a good team, very physical. Every loss except for BYU was close. They beat a good Colorado team, and they lost only by 10 against an Arizona State team that's going to the college football playoff. So what does Rutgers have to do? I've got 5 keys for Rutgers. Number 1, you got to control the time of possession. Okay, and that begins with running the ball and running it with Kyle Monangai. Monangai is an explosive back. He's tough. He's physical. He's durable. And Antoine Raymond, who has shown to be a very capable backup. Rutgers has to run the ball. And Rutgers has to sustain long drives and eat that clock. I'd like to see some 10, 11, 12 play drives, eating up 6 to 7 minutes, mostly on the ground, with Ethan Kaliakamanis being efficient in the passing game on third downs. Second key, cannot allow explosive plays to Kansas State. You got to make Kansas State work for every point. And that leads me to key number 3, the red zone. Cannot allow touchdowns in the red zone. You have to have that bend but not break approach. Give up those field goals, Rutgers. You'll take it into the fourth quarter close and can win it late. The fourth key is you got to get pressure on Kansas State's quarterback, Avery Johnson. You got to disrupt his timing, okay? And you have to control the edge so he cannot get too far out of the pocket and beat you with his legs, especially on third downs. Fifth key, hold them to 3rd down and 5 or longer, okay? You got to stuff the run on 1st down. You cannot have them in 3rd and short positions because they're going to have a high 3rd down efficiency. They're going to string out drives. And we don't want that defense that's been decimated by injuries getting too tired. So we've got the stats for each team, the records, the keys. What's the prediction? How does Rutgers end the season? Do they end it on a positive note? Well, let me begin by saying I think Rutgers and Coach Greg Schiano should be congratulated for a year in which they had a tremendous amount of talent and persevered through a tremendous number of challenges. At the beginning of the year, they start off 4-0, but Rutgers was decimated substantially by injuries. One of the teams in the country that suffered so many season-ending injuries, particularly on defense, that it made it very difficult for them to play to the standard that they expected had those injuries not occurred. Nonetheless, Rutgers persevered. Okay, they went on a 4-game losing streak after starting out 4-0 with the losses to Wisconsin, UCLA, Nebraska, and USC. But then they bounced back against Minnesota. They bounced back against Maryland. And although they suffered a heartbreaking loss to Illinois, they bounced back against Michigan State. This was a team that, as Greg Schiano said, kept chopping. And that's the motto at Rutgers: keep chopping, keep persevering, keep fighting. Okay, and the outcome will be one that you will be the one that you want to achieve. And that's what they did this year, ending up 7-5. With the injuries they had, it could have been a lot worse. But if they didn't have the injuries that they did, they could be looking at a playoff spot. So it's kind of a bittersweet end to the season. You know, you think what could have been without the injuries, but you also got to be proud of what they did given the injuries that they had, and have to be proud of the job that Coach Schiano did, persevering through those injuries and guiding the team to a winning record and a bowl game that they will now play the day after Christmas. Is Rutgers going to win the game? I don't think so. I think Kansas State pulls it out 26-23 in the Rate Bowl, because I think DJ Giddens for Kansas State, the running back, is going to be the difference. Let's hope that's not true. I hope I'm wrong. But regardless of the outcome, Rutgers has a bright future. They just got a few people out of the portal. They're ranked 30th in the country in recruiting. And the future with Greg Schiano looks bright. And a healthy Rutgers team next year will be competitive in the Big Ten. So congratulations, Coach. I wish we could all be there in Phoenix. Congratulations to the team for fighting through adversity all year, overcoming obstacles, getting Rutgers to a bowl game, and representing the state of New Jersey well. Okay, now let's turn to our second segment for tonight. This weekend begins the college football playoff. Now, before we get to that, there certainly are credible arguments that you could make regarding the college football playoff and the teams that were selected. I, for one, do not think the best 12 teams were selected. I think that the best 12 teams should have been selected, and that the sole goal of the college football playoff should be to select the top 12 teams. Now, the top 12 teams may not be a conference champion. Okay? It may not be a team with just one loss. You have to look beyond a conference championship and beyond a record to really search for who are those 12 best teams. In my view, the committee did a pretty good job. I'd give them a B. But I think they could have done better. Why do I say that? Because I'm not so sure Clemson should be in the playoff. I'm not so sure that Boise State should be in. I could name a few other teams, but you get my point. I think that ultimately we did not get the 12 best teams, but we got most of the best teams, so that's okay. And whether that means we're going to expand the playoff in the future, as has been suggested, we'll see. What I would say is if I was picking the teams, there's one team that stands out to me that should have been in the playoff and isn't. South Carolina. South Carolina was on fire at the end of the year. And I know that South Carolina had 3 losses. I know that South Carolina had a few bad losses. But I think if we're looking solely for the best teams, the 12 best teams, we don't just look at record. We don't just look at did you win your conference. You look at strength of schedule also, and you look at the trajectory of the team over the course of the year. And teams that are hot at the end, even though they may have lost earlier, may deserve a spot in the championship game, particularly if a conference champion really isn't a top-notch team, such as perhaps in the Big 12, or a team with a better record is on a downward trajectory at the end of the year. And I think that those considerations should have been important for the committee, and I think South Carolina should have gotten in over Clemson. And another reason I say that South Carolina should have gotten in over Clemson is because Clemson had 3 losses. South Carolina had 3 losses. South Carolina beat Clemson head-to-head at Clemson. So what logic can you use to say that Clemson should be in over South Carolina when they had the same amount of losses and South Carolina beat them on the road? Here's what I'll say. The only reason that happened is because of the rule that the conference champion is going to get in. That's why that rule is a problem. Another rule that is a problem are these automatic buys in which you get teams. Okay, 4 teams get buys, but you end up having teams that are getting buys that are not ranked in the top 4. That includes Boise State and Arizona State. Now, I'm not trying to knock those teams and say that they can't go deep into the playoffs, but it seems to me that the inclusion of those teams with buys is a problem. And I think we just had some technical difficulty where on the screen, a picture of a receiver from the USC Trojans just came up. But if you can hear me, keep listening. So we have 4 first-round games. Number 1, Clemson versus Texas in Austin. Okay. Hold on. I think we just fixed it. Although we have a little purple here, but that's fine. Clemson versus Texas in Austin, Texas. Who's going to win this game? Well, Texas just came off of a tough loss to Georgia. Okay. Texas has been sort of an enigma this year. A great defense, an outstanding defense, but their offense has sputtered a bit, and they have struggled as they did against Georgia. Clemson, on the other hand, Clemson had a thrilling win over SMU, a last-second field goal. However, Clemson lost to Louisville this year at home. Clemson has 3 losses. Dabo's team, not going to cut it. Texas is going to roll over Clemson, and they're going to roll 34-17. Now, we have the battle for Indiana. The battle for Indiana, Notre Dame, Fighting Irish against the Hoosiers of Indiana. I think everybody in the state of Indiana is going to be watching this game. It reminds me a bit of the movie Hoosiers, when everybody in Indiana was listening to the radio, when that little small school, I believe it was from Milan, Indiana, One on a last-second shot from the legendary Jimmy Chitwood. Who's going to win this game? Notre Dame. Notre Dame is really something that is hard. A team that's hard to figure out because Notre Dame, if you look at the last, say, 7 to 10 years, whenever they got into the playoff, they pretty much got dominated by the Alabamas and the Clemsons. This year in South Bend, Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois University at home. Then they run the table against a pretty weak schedule, but end the season against the University of Southern California Trojans. They defeat USC largely on the basis of 2 pick sixes in the last few minutes of the game. But in that USC game, we saw USC's quarterback, Jade Maava, who was the backup for most of the year, really torched that Notre Dame secondary. And if it wasn't for those 2 pick sixes, they had a chance to win that game, expose some vulnerability on the Notre Dame defense. The Indiana Hoosiers, what a year for the Hoosiers. It really has been something special. Kurt Cignetti has done a fantastic job for the Hoosiers. They come in here with one loss, 38-15 against the Buckeyes of Ohio State and Columbus, but a loss that was closer than the score indicates, and a loss that was largely the result of uncharacteristic mistakes that the Hoosiers made throughout the game. Indiana's for real. Indiana has a defense. They have a smart coach. They're going to come in with a smart scheme. So who's going to win the game in South Bend? I'm going with the Hoosiers. Upsetting Notre Dame 24-20 in South Bend. So, Texas advances. Indiana advances. And then we go to probably the most anticipated game of the weekend. And that is at one of my former alma maters, Ohio State, where I went to law school. Although I'm not an Ohio State fan, they're going to be playing the Volunteers, the SEC team, coming into the Horseshoe. What an intriguing matchup. Well, let's look at Ohio State. Ohio State, $20 million roster. Got Caleb Downs from Alabama, who plays safety. Got Quashon Judkins from Ole Miss, who along with Trayvon Henderson leads a very strong backfield. This Ohio State team is pretty stacked. And on defense, they have one of the top units in the country. But here's the problem. Their offensive line stinks. $20 million, and they have a below-average offensive line. And that has cost them this year, and that cost them against the Wolverines when Michigan's defensive line dominated the Buckeyes in the trenches, and Will Howard looked completely lost against a secondary that played, I think, the game of the year. Michigan's defense shut down an anemic Ohio State offense and showed that if you can get pressure on the quarterback, this game is going to be you're capable of beating Ohio State. What about the Volunteers? Tennessee. Okay. Tennessee has a defense this year. Tennessee has a great running back. But Tennessee has a young quarterback. Nico Maliava, and if I'm pronouncing his last name wrong, I apologize. But he's young, and he's still developing. What does that mean? That means that could spell trouble for the Tennessee offense, especially regarding turnovers. So who wins this game? It's a really tough call. Tennessee's physical. Tennessee is legit. They're fast. They're going to come in hungry. And I'm predicting that Tennessee is going to come in on fire and jump out to a lead on Ohio State in the first half along the lines of 17-7, shutting down the Ohio State offense with pressure from that defensive line. And the offensive line is going to struggle, and it's going to be a domination by Tennessee in the first half. But there's two halves in football. In the second half, Ohio State comes to life, makes just enough plays to win, and Tennessee turns it over late while driving for the winning score, 30-27, Ohio State. In a classic, in a thriller, Ohio State advances. Now, we can't count out. The next game is going to be really exciting because we will be traveling to Happy Valley, Penn State, where Drew Aller, James Franklin, and the Nittany Lions will be taking on an upstart SMU team. I don't know if you all remember the 80s and the Pony Express. We all thought the Pony Express had left the station. Apparently, that is not the case. It is back up and running as SMU comes in with 2 losses and a college football playoff berth in which they edged out Alabama for the 11th seed. And how did that happen? Well, let's look back to the conference championship game. Let's look back to Clemson and SMU. Clemson up 24-7 in the first half. It looked like it was already the end for SMU, not just for the game, but for their playoff hopes. But in the second half, SMU and the Pony Express started rolling. Okay, what we saw from SMU was that they're fast. Their quarterback is talented. They've got some receivers, and they do have a defense. Dominating Clemson for most of that second half, especially in the fourth quarter when they outscored them 17-7. Unfortunately, with 16 seconds left, they give up a long kickoff return, and Clemson's kicker kicks a long field goal as time expires to win the game. But the moral to the story, or the lesson, was that Clemson belongs, and Clemson is legit. Combine that with an Alabama loss on the road against Oklahoma, 3 Jalen Milroe interceptions. Combine that with their loss to Vanderbilt, and SMU edges out Alabama. So they go into Happy Valley, where it's going to be cold, and there's going to be 100,000 people plus wearing white. It's going to be a whiteout. Okay. So conventional wisdom would say Penn State's going to roll. But when I look at Penn State this year, I think Penn State reminds me of every Penn State team I've seen in recent memory. Great defense, especially strong on the edges, but a mediocre offense. An offense that scores just enough to win, as we saw, for example, against Minnesota, as we saw in Happy Valley against Ohio State, when Penn State was up, 10-0, scored 3 points for the rest of the game. So, what's going to happen in this game? The Pony Express will keep going and upset Penn State in Happy Valley, 26-20, and SMU will roll into the quarterfinals. So, I've got Texas, Indiana, Ohio State, SMU. Love to hear your comments. And if you want, please call in. Love to have this discussion with you. We have Duriel who just joined the show. Duriel, thanks so much for being here. How's it going?
It's going good. How about you, Adam?
It's going good, except I'm not sure that I can hear you, but I think I'm going to fix that in one. Okay.
Okay, is everything good now?
Gotcha. So, what's up?
Well, man, I'll be surprised. I didn't expect you to be the person picking 2 upsets in the college football playoff in the first round, because your theory over the last year is, well, we shouldn't even have 12 teams because there aren't that many that can win the national championship. And we should put it... Yeah, so why are you expecting there to be 2 upsets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the reason that I think there's going to be 2 upsets is because I don't think the teams that are favored are necessarily among the top 4 or 5 teams in the country. I think Notre Dame has had a soft schedule and is vulnerable. And I think Penn State doesn't have the offense to be successful. So if it was a 4-team playoff, I wouldn't have any of those teams in the playoff. And I think Indiana and SMU are going to come in hungry and determined and pull it out. Now, I could be wrong, but that would be my logic.
No offense, Adam. As I agree with your logic and I agree with what you're saying, man. I'm really hoping that that doesn't happen though, for the sake of the sport, because you know what's going to happen if Indiana wins. Everybody's going to be like, expand it some more. We need more teams like Indiana. We're proven right.
I
So for
know.
the health of the sport, I hope you're wrong.
Yeah, I'm starting to hear that already, that the committee's considering expanding it to 16 teams. I mean, I think that's crazy. If it were up to me, I would do one of two things. I would either go back to the 14 playoff with a play in between 4 and 5 for the fourth spot, or I'd go back in time to the 1980s and early 1990s and just have the traditional bowl games plus one.
Yeah, I think both of those options are much better than what we're talking about right now. And I mean, if Indiana or SMU wins, it's just going to be a, well, the ACC and Big 12 are better than are they at Big 10 and SEC. This proves that it's just ESPN media bias. The recruiting rankings don't matter. So your Penn State analysis, I think, spot on. I think something you are overlooking though is SMU is not a top 4 team. SMU might be, in my opinion, the 20th best team in the country. So if Penn State just plays how Penn State's played over the last 3 years, I think they're fine. I don't think Drew Aller needs to be good. I think he just needs to be himself to win. But I like the optimism with SMU going in and winning against Penn State. But if they win this game, it'd be by far their best win they've had all season. And there's not even a really close second.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I would have said that SMU really doesn't have a chance. But what I saw in the second half against Clemson, not that Clemson is a top 4 team, but they're a legitimate team. The way they dominated in the late third quarter into the fourth, that really impressed me, and I think they're going to come into Happy Valley with nothing to lose, hungry, playing loose, and I think that defense can hold Penn State to under 20 points, and so I think they have a shot. But I do believe I'm one of the few people who's predicting that.
Well, listen, man. If that does happen, I'll be stunned. I'll be stunned if any of the underdogs outside of Tennessee, Ohio State loses, because I believe in the talent. I believe in the rankings, and Indiana. They're a nice story, but when they played Ohio State and Michigan, you could just watch the game, and it was just obvious their lines of scrimmage. They didn't have it. And in Notre Dame is much closer to those teams than anybody else they've played all year. I don't think that game's going to be particularly close on the field, but on the scoreboard it might be close.
Yeah, you might be right. The reason I'm not sold on Notre Dame is because I'll put aside the loss to Northern Illinois, but I thought they had a pretty easy schedule. And then when they went to USC, they looked pretty vulnerable, especially in the secondary. Now, as far as Indiana goes, I agree. I mean, they didn't have a tough schedule, and they looked really vulnerable against Michigan. But what I'm kind of focused on is when I saw them play Ohio State, I felt like they hung with Ohio State for the first half, but then they made too many self-inflicted mistakes that really didn't represent the caliber of football that they were capable of playing. And I think they're going to come in hungry too. And I don't know, maybe this is the year where I'm just all for the underdog. I think they're going to pull off the victory, but again, I could be wrong for a second time.
No, you could be right. And this is the beauty about college football is we'll figure it out on the field. And that's why the only silver lining I'm taking into this 12-team playoff is it's going to make somebody will be right and somebody will be wrong. And we'll have a clear data point on who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to find any silver linings I can with this playoff. I know it's not the greatest in the world, but you have mentioned something interesting to me. What do you think's closer, the talent gap? Notre Dame versus USC or Notre Dame versus Indiana? Because to me, if Indiana went and played USC, I think there's a legitimate argument USC can win the game. Like, it'd be the second best team in terms of talent that they would face all year, along with the quarterback. Michigan's probably more talented than USC, but their quarterback play is just so atrocious it just completely drops them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the talent gap between Notre Dame and USC is much narrower than the talent gap between Notre Dame and Indiana, but I think USC has more talent than Notre Dame. I just think USC is not well coached. I think they have playmakers, and I don't think Notre Dame is as talented as USC. So I would put, in terms of talent, I would put USC 1, Notre Dame 2, and Indiana 3. So yes, the talent gap is narrower between USC and Notre Dame, but I don't think the talent gap is so substantial enough with Indiana that they're going to be able to roll over them. What do you think?
Well, I just have a difference of opinion. I think if Notre Dame just runs the ball every single play, they'll win by at least 14 points. Like, I know their stats say they're like top 5 in rush defense and stuff, but I believe a lot of that is empty calories. Like,
Yeah.
Put no Indiana against Georgia, and you're going to tell me Georgia's going to have a hard time running the football? Like, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it.
No. Indiana is not allowed to play Georgia because that would result in a massacre, in my view, and we don't want to subject Indiana's players to that trauma. I mean, I don't mean to disrespect Indiana, but I don't think Indiana's going to go far in the playoffs, but I'm not sold on this Notre Dame team, and I think Indiana's going to come in and stack the box and stop the run and force Riley Leonard to throw the ball to his receivers against what I think is a pretty good Indiana secondary. And that could work. On the other hand, Notre Dame could run for 300 yards, and I could come out on, the day after looking like a fool. So you might be right.
Look like a fool either way. Your predictions sound illogical. I don't think Riley Leonard's an elite quarterback, but in my opinion, is he slightly better than Davis Warren? Because that's all it would have took for Indiana to lose to Michigan.
Yeah.
And since his name isn't Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle, or Alex Orji, the answer is yes, in my opinion. As long as
or Michigan.
Three players.
I have such respect for Michigan, but their quarterback situation this year was atrocious. When you look at Orji, and he's in the transfer portal now, Orji couldn't throw the ball. Davis Warren, who I thought was the best of the three, the problem with Warren is that he turned the damn ball over too much, and then Tuttle retired. So I think Michigan would have been in a better position had they had a good quarterback. What I wonder is why Sharon Moore didn't get a quarterback knowing what he had on the roster. But
yeah, it's beyond me. But Riley Leonard's just an average quarterback, maybe slightly above average quarterback, and that's miles better than what I saw Indiana compete against Michigan. If Michigan had a competent quarterback, they would have longer sustained possessions. In that fourth quarter, they were only 40 yards. I mean, I believe Riley Leonard would have drove down the field and scored in that position. And I think they have to respect Riley Leonard, and the secondary is going to have to be kept more honest. I think you can kind of play the run exclusively against Michigan and get away with it. Unlike Notre Dame. Notre Dame's shown over the course of the season they're capable of throwing the football down the field, and they got wide receivers who can catch it and run with it. So,
yeah, and I think this is Notre Dame's best defense in a while. When it comes to Michigan, when I watched them play Ohio State and they beat them 13-10, all I kept thinking was what could have been for Michigan if they had a quarterback, because that defense they reminded me of the Michigan defense from last year, the way they played. But let's see. Maybe Michigan will get Miller Moss from USC or
transferred to Louisville. He's already out. He's headed to
Louisville. No. Really?
Yeah, he's at Louisville.
Oh. I predicted he was going to go to Michigan, so that's prediction number 1 is wrong. So he's at Louisville. Well, good for him. I hope he's successful.
I think he will be. Jeff Brom's an elite coach, elite offensive mind. So.
Yeah, that's true. And then Louisville, that was some game against Clemson this year. It goes into Clemson and dominates them.
Right, but, and that's the reason I can't believe in Clemson is the only 3 teams that I think have a pulse. They've played all year. They've been absolutely smashed into a million pieces.
That's true. You're right.
Did you see Sam Acho picked Clemson to win it all this year?
Who did?
Sam Acho of ESPN.
Oh, my gosh. Are you serious?
Yeah, he picked Clemson to win it all. I believe he picked them to beat Texas, Arizona State, Oregon, and Georgia.
Oh,
to win
okay.
the national championship, which...
Yeah, and I believe in Santa Claus. I mean, there's no way. That's a I have to say, I respect people's differences of opinion, but that one is out there. Speaking of Clemson, they're going into Texas. Now, one thing about Texas I'm a little bit concerned about is when I saw Quinn Ewers throw the ball against Georgia, it looked like he had no velocity on his throws. He just didn't look the same. What do you think about Texas this year? I mean, I think they're going to beat Clemson, but I think they're going to lose along the way. What do you think?
I think they need Manning in the game, at least to change the pace up. And Manning,
Yeah.
to me, has looked like the better player throughout the entire course of the season. And I think Georgia and Texas, it's kind of weird vibe that game have. I think both of them understood they were in the playoffs. I think both of them knew the path they would have would be relatively easy if they won, if they lost or won the game. So I don't know how much of it was just them saving up for the postseason. And I think Texas has the unique ability to save Arch Manning until the Oregon or Ohio State or Tennessee game. So because they play like nobody until they don't play anybody worth the pulse till the semis. So.
No, Texas Oregon would be an amazing game. I think Clemson's going down there, but as far as Georgia goes, who would have thought they would have lost Carson Beck? And
that's probably why the odds have shifted. They were tied with Texas to win the national championship last I saw their third, but man, their path is just so easy to make the national championship game. Even if they had no quarterback like Michigan, I would still pick them to make the national championship game just because you're telling me all they got to do is play Notre Dame and most likely Penn State. What are those? Maybe borderline top 10 teams to make the national championship game? I just got to go with that team. And I would do the same thing if it was Ohio State, Texas, Oregon.
Yeah, I think Georgia, if there's one team that can afford to lose a quarterback, I think it's Georgia because that defense, if it's healthy, they are tough. And, with Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne, I think my pick is Georgia to win the whole thing. But what I would say is Clemson versus Texas. We should be Xing out Clemson and putting in South Carolina, and that would be a game. But I guess we're not going to see it because
we got to have this high-minded approach at them in which all conferences are created equal.
Yes, I know, but nobody listens to me. So we got Clemson and we've got Boise State, but who knows? The hardest pick for me though was Tennessee, Ohio State.
Oh yes, that very true.
I mean, I went back and forth on that, and I just could see Tennessee coming in there and being more physical, faster, but I think Ohio State's going to settle down in the second half and pull it out. And I think Nico's going to be driving for a winning score in the fourth quarter late and turn it over. The product
very
of
possible.
But
I think it's going to be low scoring. What do you think about the type of game it's going to be? I see like a 13-10 type game.
I think it's going to be a little bit higher, maybe 20-17. It could be. It's hard to predict that one because I don't know. I kind of go against the grain on this one. Like when you expect the teams to be low scoring, sometimes I think that the Ohio State defense is vulnerable. I've seen teams march down the field on them, including Michigan State in the first half. Like they've got a tremendous amount of talent, but for some reason they don't perform to the level that their talent suggests. And I think that I think Ohio State, of both teams, Ohio State can be shut down because of their offensive line. So, but I just think at the end of the day in the horseshoe, Ohio State's going to pull it out in the low 20s by about 3. But after this happens, there'll be 4 games. We'll see. I might go 0-4, 4-0. Who knows? But they're hard to predict. I just wish that South Carolina and Ole Miss were in. But
right, we got to expand it to 16 for that reason. On that reason alone, we don't need to change the format, change the seedings or anything. We're just going to expand. That's clearly the easiest option. We just live with a bunch of stupid people at the top of this thing. It feels like that are trying to intentionally damage the sport as much as possible.
That's what I was just going to say to you. Like every time that you call, you make total sense. You have common sense. You're intelligent. You make great suggestions. But then the people in the positions of authority are the worst. I mean, why in God's name would you expand the playoff to include. I guess their logic is we want to expand the playoff so that teams like South Carolina and Ole Miss could get in. Well, the problem is that they should have been in already, and if you had picked the right teams, you wouldn't need to expand it because are you picking the best? I mean, does this playoff pick the teams that are reasonably likely to win a national championship? No. That's why I've always said every year it should be different. Some years it could be 4 teams. Some years it could be 6. Other years it could be 8. One year it could be 2. Why should we stick to a specific number that must be in every year? I don't know. All I know is this, though, and I'm going to say the thing that's probably the most controversial thing. The team that should be playing Notre Dame is not Indiana. The team that should be playing Notre Dame is Florida.
If you want to just go by who's hot right now, then Florida is a good choice for that. But 5 losses, man, is just too much for me. It's a little bit.
I am going to be the only person in the world who probably says this. I don't care about the 5 losses because at the end of the year, Florida was one of the best 12 teams. That's why in the NFL, my 6-loss Giants in 2007 got in via the wild card and went against the 15-0 evil Patriots and defeated them in the Super Bowl. And I was in Louisiana at the time. What a game. And then they did it again a few years later. I'm not a big believer in focusing so much on losses when the losses are close and they come against very good teams. But I do understand why 5 losses is too much for some people. I do get that.
Right.
But
I think, yeah, let's try to get Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina in first before getting Florida. Let's try to get the teams that I believe are obviously better than certain other teams before going down that rabbit hole because, the Big 12 commissioner, the ACC commissioner, the G5 commissioners would object to it. And I'm not saying it's because it's silly. I think it makes logical sense. It's because it's against their interest.
Exactly.
Even though on the field, I think Florida would beat every single Big 12 team right now.
Right, and that's my argument. Like, if someone said to me, I think Florida State would beat, I don't know, Arizona State or Boise State, well, then why aren't they in the play? Why are you arguing they shouldn't be in the playoff? Oh, because their record isn't as good. Well, but you think they're a better team. And, I would also like to, instead of SMU, I would also like to see Penn State playing Florida State. Nope, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go that far. But I think we need to really consider how we look at wins and losses. I mean, when you look at the wild card and you see a 6-loss Giants team win the Super Bowl, what does that tell you when they beat a 15-0 Patriots team? But,
Right. Well, we also got to keep in mind this is the most valuable regular season. If you have 5-6 loss, a 500 team in the playoffs, that's going to devalue the regular season to a point where I think a lot of people are going to be tuning out. I'm not saying that right or wrongly. I think there's a case it's theoretically possible, but I don't see it ever happening.
Yeah, I think I need to recognize the influence that money has in this. I'm one of those people who just is idealistic and wants to see the best 12 teams. And you know what? South Carolina, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Florida, in my view. But who knows? We have Indiana, Boise State.
Well, if you want those, you should root for a complete blowout by Notre Dame and Penn State. Just a complete smashing, start to finish beatdown like it was against Georgia, Florida State, where everybody understands this team is clearly better than the other team. There's no doubt about it. Doesn't matter what would happen. That way, there's no controversy. The refs didn't rig the game or anything like that, and nobody can make any sort of arguments. And I think that would be the most impactful thing for changing this.
Yeah, you're right. Because if I'm right in my predictions, even a couple of them, that's going to justify expanding the playoff, even if it's close between SMU and Penn State and Indiana, Notre Dame. So we'll see.
Right. They did it last year with Florida State. They said they were like, oh, Florida State's undefeated and left out. We got to expand it this way. It never happens again.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with Florida State. Who's your pick to win the national championship?
Georgia.
Me too. I think the SEC reigns again.
Yeah, Georgia, Texas is my national championship game. Who do you got Georgia beating?
Um, Oregon.
Fair. That's
Yeah.
very possible. I just think Oregon's path in playing Ohio State is going to beat them down toward the Texas game. And I think
Yeah.
Texas is going to save a bunch of stuff. That's the only reason I'm going with Texas. I think Oregon's a better team. I think they're the most proven team this season. And I think they've got the best in terms of coaching talent and performance throughout the entire course of the season. I think their draw is just pathetic because our sport is run by people who clearly don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, these draws were terrible. I think you and I should be on the playoff committee next year. How do we get on it? Who do we have to talk?
We got to be an administrator or something for one of these universities at least. We got to, like, they have professors and journalists and all sorts of stuff, just random people that are involved in the university process. So you've got a chance. I mean, I think you do something with USC, right? You're
I teach at a college, here in Georgia, but it's a small liberal arts college. Doesn't have much sway with the NCAA. I wish it did, but you get all these people, these people on the committee to make such bad decisions, or not such bad, but decisions that could have been better is surprising. But we'll see how.
We need to separate the format from the committee. Those are two different things, and I've seen people combine them. It's not the committee's fault that Oregon has to play Ohio State, Tennessee, but it is the committee's fault that the rankings are so messed up. Like SMU being ahead of Clemson, despite Clemson beating SMU, Ohio State being behind Penn State.
Yeah, Boise State getting a bye.
That's the format. That's not the committee's fault.
I know, but who's doing the format?
It's I believe it's the conference commissioners. They all gather and they have to have a unanimous vote.
Well, they're just as bad then, if not worse, because that's ridiculous. But you're right; it's not the committee's fault. But whoever thought that was a good idea.
Well, it's what happens in society at large is you have a bunch of people with a bunch of different interests. So everybody's got to get their piece of the pie, and then what happens is it's just completely distorted from what anybody wants it to look like.
Yeah,
and that's how you end up in this situation because you got no real leadership or connection. The SEC and Big Ten's only got 2 out of 10 votes, even though they got 90% of the power, something like. I mean, they got an insane amount of the power. So
you got to accommodate everybody. Well, listen, Duriel, thanks so much for calling in. I appreciate it as always, and call in again on our next show, please.
Yeah, and good luck to your Rutgers football team.
Thanks. Hopefully they'll pull it out. Take care. All right, guys, that was Duriel. Always happy to have him call in because makes such intelligent comments, great insights. Duriel, we appreciate it. Now we're going to turn to the final segment of today's show, and it will be a brief one. The transfer portal. The transfer portal. What we're seeing as the season comes to a close is dozens and dozens of players transferring. After just 1 year in the program, some after multiple years in the program, over a dozen people at Alabama, over a dozen players at Alabama are in the portal, including some with substantial playing time this year. Zachariah Branch, star receiver for USC, in the portal. So, I'm just going to be honest with you. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. And I think the combination of the portal and NIL is absurd and is harming not only college football, but these kids. Now I'm going to go on just a very short rant. To be successful in life, you have to learn certain things. You have to learn things like how to work hard, how to overcome adversity, how to persevere when things aren't going your way, how to wait your turn for your opportunity to be successful, okay? How to be loyal to a team or an organization over the course of time, how to have maturity, okay? How to recognize that your self-interest is not only the only interest, and most importantly, that money is not the most important thing if you are not going to learn life lessons that are going to make you successful not only on the football field, but in life after football. What's happening now is these kids aren't learning those values. And these kids are not going to be successful in life as a result of it. Because what are they doing? They're looking for the quickest fix, the most money. That's why you hear all these young players, 17, 18, 19 years old, transferring because it's a business decision. What they mean is, I'm getting more money from another school, so I'm going to go there. Well, what does that say about your character? What does that say about the loyalty that you have to the institution that gave you a scholarship and NIL money in the first place? It shows that you have no loyalty. It shows that, oh, you're upset because you didn't start or get enough playing time. It shows that you're not willing to overcome adversity. You're not willing to persevere because some other school with a lot more money is going to pay you a few $100,000 more, and you're going to run to that. Well, if you adopt that model and those values, guys, in real life, you're not going to be successful. You'll be chasing the next best thing, and eventually you're going to hit a dead end. What Nick Saban, for example, taught his players was the process. All right? That you don't focus on the outcome. You don't focus on the money. You don't focus on what draft pick you're going to be. You focus on what choices and decisions are you making every day to make yourself as successful as you can be on the football field and in life. Are you being disciplined? Are you making good choices? Okay? Are you building a sustainable future? Are you doing things that you don't want to do, but you still do anyway because you know that they're the right decisions? Are you overcoming and persevering when you have a bad day and you fail? Do you learn lessons from it, or do you sulk on the sidelines? The lessons that he taught them were life lessons that would serve these players well in life. And now, what do we see? At the slightest sign of adversity or discontent or dissatisfaction with a coach, with playing time, the first instinct is not to respond productively or constructively. It's not to fight through the adversity and overcome the obstacles. It's to look to see what school is going to give you the most money. Okay, so you go to another school that gives you a lot of money. And what if you don't start at that school? What if something goes wrong again? Are you going to go look for more money again? And what money are you getting? Let's say that a school gives you $2 million. Well, after taxes, is that really that much money that's going to last you a lifetime? That's why Nick Saban would always say, you're building value for yourself over the course of a sustainable career and in life, so that after football, you will have the values, the work ethic, and the principles to be successful. What college football is teaching these kids now is precisely the opposite. These kids are running the show. They are running the program. They are holding the coaches hostage, whereby the coaches have to sit there and kiss these players' asses and give them money just to stay on a team. That's not right. You should be there because you want to be on the team and you want to be part of that school and you are loyal to that school because that's what a team is built on. That's what team chemistry is built on. People who want to be there, who want to go through the grind, who want to bust their asses, who can rise up when things aren't going well, when they're faced with challenges. Now, it's just an easy way out. Other schools are going to come with bags and bags of money, promise you a Lamborghini, promise you playing time, and then you're going to transfer, and you're never going to learn what it really means to fight through a goddamn war and to fight when you're at your weakest and when the odds are stacked against you. And what values is college football teaching our kids by doing that? None. They're teaching them about quitting, giving up, valuing short-term gain over long-term sustainability. And these kids are going to find out when football is over and when the money's not there, and they don't have that work ethic, that ability to persevere, to get through challenges, they're going to find out that it really wasn't worth it. And what are these schools doing and these boosters doing by throwing money at these kids? They don't care one thing about these kids. They don't care about teaching them anything. So now we have a situation where the players are calling the shots. And the coaches have to beg the players to stay. I think it's about time that at least one university or one coach stands up to these players and says, you know what? You want to enter the transfer portal? Go right ahead. But don't you come back here and think you're ever going to play for this university again. Get your ass out of here. It's time for some old school values. Because if you really care about people, especially young people, you're going to do things they may not like, but you know are beneficial for their future. And what's happening to college football is sad. It's unfortunate. And ultimately, it will be to the detriment of the game. And hopefully at some point, the NCAA will step in and develop much needed regulations for what is right now the wild, wild west. With that, that is the end of my rant and this show. We'll be back here next week for a live show, well, in about 9 days, for a live post-game show after the Rutgers-Kansas State game. We hope you join us then. If you like this show, please hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you after the game next week. Have a great night.